the ambassador's rest space station was meant to be neutral ground. A sprawling, pristine station hanging in the silence of deep space, nestled between the Federation and Zenthari territories. In theory, it was supposed to foster diplomacy. In reality, it was a pressure cooker, the tension in the air thick enough to taste. Lieutenant Sarah Bennett felt at the moment she stepped onto the station's deck. It wasn't the sterile white walls or the hum of artificial gravity that made the air oppressive, it was the voices. The diplomats and generals and officers milling about, all talking, always talking. Words that danced around the issue, never quite touching the truth. The war. The slaughter. The unrelenting march of Zenthari forces across human colonies, only to meet their first true setback at the Battle of Ulthar Prime. The Federation had won, but no one was celebrating. No one ever celebrated in this cold, cutthroat universe. Sarah was here as an observer, though she hated the word. The Federation had sent her to observe the final rounds of peace talks, a formality after the war's long grind. There were whispers that the Federation's diplomats wanted peace. The Zenthari, on the other hand, seemed to have no such desire. But Sarah wasn't blind. There was something in the way their negotiators spoke, something that didn't add up. She passed through the corridors of the station, the polished floors reflecting her every step. She had briefed herself on the players, diplomats, generals, military advisors, all the usual suspects. But her eyes kept drifting back to one figure, and she knew why: Grand Strategist Raxx, the Zenthari's unyielding military leader. Sarah had seen Raxx on holovids before, a towering creature with glossy, obsidian scales, 6 eyes, and a reputation that sent shivers down even the bravest of spines. She was said to be cold, ruthless, calculating. The war had forged her into the perfect leader, and she had led the Zenthari with an iron grip, one that Sarah had no doubt had crushed countless human colonies. But something had changed. Sarah reached the conference hall, a sprawling room made of glass and reinforced metal, designed to look as if it were suspended in the void itself. Through the walls, she could see the stars twinkling like 1,000 distant fires. A fitting backdrop for what was supposed to be the most important meeting in the galaxy's history. Inside, the chairs were arranged in a semicircle. Federation diplomats were already seated, including Ambassador Eliza Hart, a sharp-tongued woman with silver-streaked hair and an eye for details. Sarah nodded at Hart as she took her seat, but the older woman's expression remained unreadable, her hands folded on the table in front of her. Lieutenant Bennett, Hart greeted her, her voice smooth but with an edge of weariness. "You're right on time. A rarity these days." "I try," Sarah replied with a half-smile, though she knew this wasn't the time for pleasantries. She sat down across from the delegation, her eyes scanning the room. The Zenthari hadn't arrived yet, and the tension was palpable. Conversations were hushed, but Sarah noticed the occasional glance exchanged among the humans, too quick to be casual. Even they were uncertain about what was to come. "Everything set for the meeting?" Sarah asked a junior diplomat next to her. "As set as it can be," the man replied with a shrug. "But there's something off. Have you noticed how quiet the Zenthari are lately? No threats, no posturing. It's almost unsettling." Before Sarah could respond, the doors to the conference hall opened, and a cold draft swept in as Raxx entered. The room went silent, the Zenthari leader's presence commanding attention. She was a sight to behold, towering over the humans, her reptilian eyes cold and calculating. She glided into the room like a predator, flanked by her most trusted lieutenants, their gaze never straying from her. "Grand Strategist Raxx," Ambassador Hart said, her voice steady. "I trust your journey was comfortable." Raxx didn't answer immediately. She took a long moment, surveying the room, her 6 eyes flicking over each Federation diplomat like a hawk sizing up prey. Then, finally, she spoke. "Comfort," Raxx said, her voice deep and resonant, "is a luxury I no longer indulge in." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. That was different. The Zenthari had always been confident, almost arrogant in their superiority. The words hung in the air like an unspoken truth. Something was wrong, something was changing, and it was more than the defeat at Ulthar Prime. The Zenthari leader took her seat across from Sarah, her eyes narrowing as they met the human diplomat's gaze. Sarah didn't flinch. If Raxx wanted to make her uncomfortable, it wouldn't work. I understand we are here to discuss the future of this war, Raxx continued, her voice steady. I will not waste time with pleasantries. The Zenthari collective has made a decision. Sarah stiffened. This wasn't the usual bravado she was accustomed to. The Zenthari weren't known for making decisions quickly, much less announcing them without careful deliberation. The Federation had always expected them to fight to the bitter end. They'd underestimated the Zenthari's will to dominate, and now... Sarah didn't know what to think. Raxx continued, her eyes scanning the Federation representatives. We are prepared to offer you a surrender. The words landed like a bombshell. The room fell silent. Even Hart's typically composed face betrayed a flicker of shock, and Sarah's mind raced. A surrender? The Zenthari didn't surrender. Not after decades of victory, not after slaughtering billions of human colonists. Raxx leaned forward, her cold gaze fixing on Sarah. We have no intention of fighting a war we cannot win. You are resourceful. I underestimated you. Sarah's mouth went dry. This wasn't a peace offer, it was an acknowledgement of their defeat. But there was something off about it. And what exactly does surrender mean to the Zenthari? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm of questions in her mind. We will withdraw from Federation space. Our forces will cease all military actions. There will be no more battles. No more bloodshed, Raxx replied, her tone almost resigned. Ambassador Hart leaned forward. And in return? In return, we expect peace, Raxx said simply. A treaty. A new future, for both our peoples. The words hung in the air, thick with implications. Sarah's mind raced. There had to be something more. This wasn't the Zenthari way. They didn't simply fold. There had to be an agenda, something deeper hidden behind the surrender. But for now, all she could do was watch and listen. The war was far from over. It was only just beginning. The days following Raxx's announcement of surrender blurred into a tense waiting game. The Zenthari leader's words had stunned the Federation delegates, but no one dared move too quickly. The Federation was caught between the shock of the offer and the overwhelming urge to secure the peace that had eluded humanity for so long. The station buzzed with constant negotiations, but Sarah Bennett found herself standing apart, her mind churning. She had seen it in Raxx's eyes, the resignation wasn't real. There was something else beneath the surface, something that wasn't being said. That morning, as the hum of the station's gravity fields reverberated through the floor beneath her, Sarah walked briskly through the corridors, her thoughts focused on the briefing she had just attended. The Federation had already begun preparing the framework for a peace treaty, but Sarah wasn't convinced it was time to celebrate. Peace could be an illusion, and illusions were dangerous. She arrived at the conference hall early, hoping for a moment of clarity before the next round of talks began. The walls of the room, normally reflective and cold, now seemed to close in on her, pressing against her chest. The Federation delegates were already seated, the weight of the previous day's discussions still heavy on their shoulders. The Zenthari had yet to arrive, but Sarah knew they wouldn't be long. Lieutenant Bennett, Ambassador Hart greeted her with a nod. The older diplomat's expression was as guarded as ever, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps concern, hidden in her eyes. You're not buying it either, are you? Sarah couldn't help but let out a short laugh. I don't trust it. There's no way the Zenthari just give up like this. Not after everything. Exactly, Hart replied, leaning back in her chair. And Raxx is too calculated. She's not the type to surrender unless it serves a greater purpose. We need to figure out what she's playing at before we sign anything. Before Sarah could respond, the doors slid open, and Raxx entered with her usual air of quiet authority. The Zenthari leader, towering and formidable, was flanked by two of her lieutenants. Their movements were smooth, almost rehearsed, as though every step had been calculated well in advance. Sarah's gaze immediately locked with Raxx's, and the intensity of that connection sent a shiver down her spine. Raxx did not waste time with pleasantries. She took her seat with a deliberate calm, her 6 eyes scanning the room, taking in every face, every detail. She seemed almost detached from the proceedings, as though she were already beyond the outcome of these talks. "I trust we are all prepared," Raxx said, her voice rich with the weight of centuries of authority. "The Zenthari Collective is ready to make our terms final." "Terms?" Sarah could not help herself. The words tumbled from her mouth before she could rein them in. "There's no terms for surrender, Grand Strategist. You give up. We win. That's how it works." Raxx's eyes flicked to her, but there was no anger, no challenge. Just a cold, calculating calm. "Ah, Lieutenant Bennett," she said softly, her voice now a razor edge. "It is a mistake to think victory is only defined by who controls a world or who survives the longest. Sometimes, surrender is the ultimate form of strength." Sarah's fingers tightened around the edges of her chair. She knew better than to let Raxx bait her, but something in those words made her uneasy. The Zenthari were not a race known for their humility. "Let's get to it," Hart said, breaking the tension. "We're here to negotiate the specifics of your surrender. What are you proposing?" Raxx inclined her head slightly, as if considering her words. "We propose a cessation of hostilities, effective immediately. All Zenthari forces will withdraw from Federation-controlled space. Our fleets will remain intact, but will not engage in combat again. You will cease your military operations. A treaty will be drawn up and signed by both parties within the month." There was a long silence. Sarah could feel the weight of the words in the room. The Federation's diplomats exchanged wary glances, their faces pale, unsure of how to proceed. The offer was tempting, but it felt like a trap. She was convinced of it. The Zenthari had been relentless, unstoppable. Why would they suddenly bow out without warning? "Let me make sure I understand this," Sarah said, leaning forward. "You're offering us peace in exchange for nothing. No restitution. No guarantees. Just an agreement that we stop fighting. You're just done?" Raxx's gaze sharpened. "You underestimate me, Lieutenant. I did not come here to offer nothing. I came to offer you the future. The Zenthari will retreat for now. In exchange, we ask for something you cannot afford to refuse." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "And what would that be?" "We ask for humanity's cooperation," Raxx said, her voice cold and calm, as though the very notion were something obvious. "The Zenthari have grown weary of war. Our future lies in the stars beyond this galaxy. You will provide us with the means to leave. To build a new home, in exchange for peace." The room was dead silent. It wasn't an outright demand for resources, nor a claim to Federation territories. It was more subtle, an alliance, perhaps. An exchange of knowledge, technology, or something far more dangerous. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "We've already beaten you in battle," Sarah spoke before she could stop herself. "What makes you think we'll help you after all the deaths you've caused? You think just because you offer peace, we'll just, agree to hand over everything?" Raxx's expression did not change, but there was a faint gleam in her 6 eyes. "You misunderstand, Lieutenant," she said slowly. "The war is over for the Zenthari, but for humanity. It is only just beginning." Sarah's mind raced, the implications of those words crashing into her like a tidal wave. What was Raxx implying? Was this a new weapon? A trap? A subterfuge designed to shift the balance of power? The Grand Strategist stood, her towering form imposing. "Think carefully, all of you. The Zenthari will leave you alone, if you choose the right path. Refuse, and you will find that the surrender was never the end." With those final words, she turned and left the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The Federation delegates sat frozen, staring at the now empty seat where Raxx had been. Sarah's heart was pounding. There was something hidden beneath the surface of this peace offer, and she intended to find out what it was. The Federation had won the battle, but the war, the real war, had only just begun. As the doors closed behind the Zenthari leader, Sarah whispered to herself, "We've been played. We just don't know how yet." The following days on Ambassador's Rest felt like walking on the edge of a precipice. Sarah Bennett could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her every step. She had seen the looks exchanged between the Federation diplomats. They were nervous, tentative, unsure whether to embrace the offer of peace or question its sincerity. But it wasn't just the peace deal that unsettled Sarah, it was what Raxx had said. The war is over for the Zenthari, but for humanity, it is only just beginning. That phrase gnawed at her, its implications growing darker with each passing hour. Sarah sat in her small quarters, the soft glow of the station's artificial lighting casting long shadows on the walls. A map of the galaxy floated before her, lines tracing the Federation's borders and the Zenthari's rapid advances. She studied it intently, tracing the paths of the Zenthari fleets as they had expanded and contracted over the years. But for the first time, she saw something else in those lines. A pattern. A strategy. Something that didn't make sense. A sharp knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Sarah called, her voice tinged with fatigue. The door slid open, and Ambassador Hart stepped inside, her expression as unreadable as ever. She was holding a data pad, its surface flickering with streams of information. She didn't sit, instead, she walked over to Sarah's desk and placed it down with a quiet thud. "Something's not right," Hart said without preamble, her eyes scanning the star map on the screen. "I've been going over the reports, the intel. Something's been off about Raxx's offer. But it's more than just what she said, it's what she didn't say." Sarah met Hart's gaze, sensing the older woman's frustration. "What do you mean?" "Look at this," Hart said, tapping the pad. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of encrypted Zenthari communications intercepted over the past few weeks. The Zenthari are being more discreet. Not in their usual fashion, but in a way that's even more dangerous. Sarah frowned. "Discreet? I thought they were always blunt, even reckless." "They were," Hart agreed, "but these transmissions, they've been altered. And not just in content, but in structure. Someone high up in their chain of command is covering something." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Are you saying Raxx knows something? Or that she's hiding something about the peace deal?" "Both," Hart said flatly. "But there's more. These altered transmissions, there's a pattern to them. They don't just contain military commands or tactical plans. They reference a project. A project so secret, even the most senior Zenthari officers were unaware of it until recently." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "A project? What kind of project?" Hart hesitated, then leaned in. "We don't know yet. But it involves something with their technology. Something that could change the balance of power in ways we can't even fathom." The room felt smaller. Sarah's mind raced. The Zenthari had always been ahead of the Federation in certain technologies, but nothing prepared her for the possibility of an unseen weapon. A project, hidden away from prying eyes for years, now about to be unleashed. "We need to know more," Sarah said, her voice steely. "We can't let them catch us off guard again. Not after everything we've already lost." Hart's gaze hardened. "Agreed. And that's where you come in, Lieutenant." Sarah looked up, confused. "Me?" "We have a source," Hart said, glancing around as if to ensure they were not overheard. "A defector. A Zenthari officer who was part of the project. He's on the station, but we've kept him in isolation for his protection." Sarah blinked. "You want me to interrogate him?" "No," Hart said, shaking her head. "We need to approach this carefully. We want you to meet him, gain his trust. He has vital information, but we can't risk pushing him too hard. If we do this right, he might be our only chance to uncover what Raxx is hiding." A weight settled on Sarah's shoulders. She had faced countless missions in her career, but this felt different. It wasn't about military might, it wasn't about strategy, it was about trust. A trust she wasn't sure she was ready to place in a Zenthari defector. "Where do I find him?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. There was no turning back now. "His name is Valcor," Hart said. "You'll find him in the isolation ward, just 2 levels down. He's been cooperative so far. But be cautious. He's a former commander in Tarax's fleet. His loyalty runs deep, even if he's disillusioned with her now." With that, Hart turned and left, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Sarah sat back in her chair, staring at the star map again. The Federation was facing the unknown once more, and it wasn't a challenge of firepower, it was a game of shadows. One where the rules were changing, and where betrayal could come from the unlikeliest of places. The isolation ward was colder than Sarah had anticipated. The low hum of the station's life support system filled the silence, a constant reminder that she was far from home. She approached the cell, where a figure stood in the shadows, his face partially obscured by the dim lighting. Valcor was unlike any Zenthari Sarah had ever seen. Though his scales were the same dark, glossy black as most of his kind, his posture was less rigid, less intimidating. There was weariness in his eyes, an exhaustion that went beyond physical. The Zenthari, once so proud and confident, now seemed like broken shells of their former selves. "Valcor," Sarah said, her voice steady but not unkind. "I'm Lieutenant Sarah Bennett. I've been sent to speak with you." The defector's eyes flicked up, and for a moment, Sarah saw a flash of something, suspicion, caution, but also something else. Regret, maybe. "Lieutenant," Valcor's voice was gravelly, as though speaking was a burden. "I've been expecting you." Sarah took a deep breath. "We need to talk about the project. The one Raxx has been hiding." At the mention of her name, Valcor's eyes darkened. "You have no idea what you're asking, human," he whispered, his voice laced with fear. "She will destroy everything, if she has to. For her cause. For the future she believes in." Sarah leaned in, her instincts sharpening. "Then tell me. What is she planning?" Valcor hesitated, his hand twitching as though he wanted to reach out, to reveal something he had kept buried. The truth was within his grasp. And Sarah was going to make sure she dragged it out, no matter what it took. The isolation ward was silent, save for the soft hum of the station systems and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Sarah's gaze never wavered from Valcor, the defector, who sat hunched in the corner of the cell. His appearance was disheveled, the weight of his past hanging heavy on him like a cloak. His once proud posture was now slouched, as if the very act of standing under the weight of his choices was a struggle. Sarah stood in front of him, arms crossed, her mind whirring. The Zenthari had always been a formidable enemy, relentless and strategic. And now, after everything, the possibility that Raxx had hidden a weapon or project from them loomed like a storm on the horizon. "Valcor," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Tell me what she's planning. What is the project?" The Zenthari defector's 6 eyes flickered with something, fear, recognition, and perhaps, a final shred of hope. But his face remained unreadable. He swallowed, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you," he whispered, voice strained. "But the truth must be known, or all of this will be for nothing." Sarah stepped closer, her brow furrowed. "You're saying Raxx has been hiding something, something huge. What is it?" Valcor paused, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on his knees. "It's not a weapon, Lieutenant. It's something far worse." He met her gaze, his eyes suddenly sharp. "A new kind of life." Sarah blinked, processing the words. "A new life?" "Yes," Valcor continued, his voice growing steadier as he spoke. "The Zenthari, we've been working on creating an artificial race. Not just machines, not just synthetic bodies. Something more. We've managed to splice our DNA with that of the highest species across the galaxy, blending organic and artificial. The plan was to create a perfect soldier, something stronger, smarter, more adaptable than anything we've encountered before." Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. She was no stranger to military secrets, but this? This sounded like something out of a nightmare. You were making a new breed of soldier?" she asked, her voice low, incredulous. Valcor nodded slowly, his hands curling into fists. "But it's more than that. The project was about control. Raxx wanted to build a race that would be bound to her, loyal beyond anything. They would never question, never disobey. Soldiers with no will of their own, no fear, no hesitation." Sarah's mind raced. The Zenthari had always been a fearsome force, but this? This was an entirely different level of threat. "And you're telling me this was all hidden from the Federation? From the entire galaxy?" "It was supposed to be a secret," Valcor muttered. But Raxx didn't want to stop there. She wanted to take it further. These beings, these soldiers, they were supposed to evolve. They were going to be the foundation of a new order, a new way of life for the Zenthari. A way for her to control everything. To make sure the Zenthari would never lose again. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. If Raxx succeeded in creating these beings, it would change the balance of power for good. The Federation would never be able to stop her. But there was more. There had to be more. "Where are they?" Sarah demanded, her voice sharp. "Where are these soldiers now?" Valcor's eyes darkened, the fear evident in them now. "They've been activated. They're already on the move." The final stage of the project was to unleash them on Federation worlds, to destabilize everything before Raxx could strike. She planned to use the peace talks as a distraction. While you're here negotiating, her forces would be attacking from within. It felt as if the floor had just dropped out from beneath her. Sarah's heart raced. So the peace offer, it was never real? "No," Valcor replied, his voice shaking. "Raxx never wanted peace. She wanted to manipulate you all. She wanted to strike when your guard was down, to cripple the Federation from the inside out." The realization hit Sarah like a thunderclap. The Zenthari had never intended to surrender. Raxx had been playing a deeper game, one that was more insidious than anything they could have imagined. She wasn't offering peace, she was giving them a false sense of security, only to turn it into an advantage for herself. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "How many of them are there? How far along is the project?" Valcor hesitated before answering, his voice grim. "There's a facility, hidden on one of the outer colonies. It's where they're being trained, honed, prepared for battle. The project is nearly complete. But the worst part," he paused, swallowing hard. "The worst part is that the soldiers are still evolving. They're not bound by anything. No rules, no loyalties. They are more than just soldiers, they are predators. And Raxx wants to send them to the heart of Federation space." A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. The stakes had just escalated far beyond anything she could have anticipated. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This wasn't just a diplomatic crisis anymore. This was a fight for survival. She turned on her heel, her mind already working at 1,000 miles per hour. She had to warn the Federation. They had to move, and they had to move quickly. "Valcor," she said, turning back to face him. "You've done the right thing by coming forward. But now, you need to help us stop this. If you want to make up for what you've done, you have to help us destroy the facility." Valcor met her gaze. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something almost like guilt. "I will help you," he said, his voice steady. "But you need to understand one thing, Raxx won't stop. She's already made her move, and she won't hesitate to sacrifice anything or anyone to see her plan through." Sarah nodded, feeling a new sense of urgency settle within her. "We'll stop her. But we need to act fast." Without another word, Sarah left the isolation ward. She knew what needed to be done. The Federation had to act before the Zenthari's monstrous creations could be unleashed. A new breed of soldier, a new breed of terror, it was time to stop them before they ever saw the light of day. As she made her way to the command center, the weight of the situation pressed against her chest, but she knew there was no turning back. Raxx had underestimated humanity. She had underestimated the strength of those who had nothing left to lose. And Sarah Bennett? She would see this through to the bitter end.